Welcome to Better Relationships, Better Life, a podcast where you'll gain insights from relationship experts and entrepreneurial couples who have moved through conflict and into a better life. Crack the clarity code and create deeper connections beyond the messiness of relationships. Here's your host, Judy K. Herman.
Before we begin, if you're looking for a speaker for your next event, I would love to support you and your organization. Just go to judyspeaker.com. In today's episode, I'm so honored to feature Katherine Woodward Thomas, who is the New York Times bestselling author of 2 books, Conscious Uncoupling and Calling in the One. She's also an award-winning marriage and family psychotherapist. Let's listen in on today's show, Breaking Up and Becoming Better, Conscious Uncoupling. Welcome to Better Relationships, Better Life. My name is Judy K. Herman, and I have a special guest, Katherine Woodward Thomas, and she has written a remarkable New York Times best-selling book called Conscious Uncoupling. And that was my first exposure to her. It's 5 steps to living happily even after. And it was, she's a licensed marriage and family therapist and a teacher to thousands from all corners of the world, and in both virtually and in person. Katherine, thank you so much. There is so much to your credentials, and it's all going to be in the show notes, by the way. But I really want to get into our conversation because you are a remarkable woman that's making a tremendous impact. And I do want to tell you, first of all, on a very personal level, that I got a hold of your book and read it cover to cover. And I was needing to go through it myself after going through some very difficult times. So on a deep level, you have made an impact, and I just wanted to let you know that up front. And I so look forward to you being my guest today.
Thank you. That really touches me. It never ceases to move my heart, how much we can make a difference for one another. Sometimes, a lot of us are making efforts like you're just kind of sitting in your home and getting on the phone or getting on a Zoom call, and we're just doing our best. And then to hear back how meaningful that's been, it's just very touching.
Well, on a deeper level even. So I had written my book, Beyond Messy Relationships, and as therapists, and I think probably because a lot of people that are entrepreneurial couples and individuals are going to be listening to this program, but a lot of us deal with this imposter syndrome. So here I was about to face, I was about to be a twice divorced relationship therapist. And I had written my book, Beyond Messy Relationships. And it's like, I didn't know very many other therapists that were just being that authentic and that real. And so when I found out about your first book, which was Calling in the One, like, right. Wow, I said, here's my soul sister. Oh, thank you, Lord, for bringing Katherine into my life. And I know you didn't even know me, but that piece also really said, I'm not the only one here. I'm not the only one. So I want to tell you, thank you.
Well, my friend Polly Young Eisendrath is probably someone else you should invite onto your show. She's quite wonderful. She wrote a book called Love Between Equals. And what Polly is saying, which also, Stephanie Coons has been saying and is somewhat even in Calling in the One, but to recognize that we're really at this place of rapid transformation of relationships. And that Stephanie Coons says that the relationships have changed more in the last 30 years than they did in the 3,000 years before that.
Wow.
And what Polly's pointing out in her book is that we really are moving from a role-based relationship model that's hierarchical in nature to a model of love between equals, where both people are holding power and where our expectations are radically different. And where Polly is kind of a soul sister, I think, to us, is that she's recognizing that we aren't yet the people we would need to be to have that go well. We actually don't have the development We weren't raised in households where we saw that modeled because they had a different kind of connection. A lot of us had parents who were getting divorced during the divorce revolution of the 70s. And so we saw a lot of hostility. We did not see good models on how to bring conscious completion to a relationship in a way that created cohesion for everyone. We saw kind of the wrecking ball version of how to end a marriage. And there's been a lot of confusion that a lot of us have lived with. So those of us who are kind of on the front lines of the conversation, it's good for us to stay humble and to recognize that we don't have to have all the answers, but it is helpful to know some of the questions to ask. That's what I'm finding.
Absolutely, because you give us a holistic view, like just what you said, and you also do that in your book, which I think is remarkable. And we are designed for connection as human beings, and so to be able to, this is not something flippant, this conscious uncoupling. People might criticize that and say you're just trying to put a pretty word to divorce or whatever. But no, it's something, it's much deeper than that. And so I think how you address this is so very compassionate and loving and understanding. And yet you invite people to do their inner work. I mean, with your 5 steps, oh my gosh, that's deep stuff. That's amazing.
Yeah. And I tried to make it really simple and elegant so that it's accessible. Sometimes we think deep stuff is like, oh, I have to, be in therapy for 10 years because it's so deep. But I don't know that we have, any of us, the feeling like, oh, I have 10 years to spare before I start feeling happy and productive in life. Like, that, and as particularly with the state of the world right now, which is really kind of elevating our need to show up in our strength, in our wisdom, in our depth and capacity to give and to shine our light, so to speak. So, and we also need good relationships to be our best selves, to be able to do that. So I think the big question for me that really started this whole thing is, how long do I have to be quote unquote healing before one day I can have a great relationship? Like, is there any bottom to that bottomless pit of my mother did and my father did, and then this happened and that happened? And what I discovered that has really changed everything for me is that while it's very important for us to go backwards to connect the dots with our history, that healing is a different domain than transformation. And so there's certain things that happened to us in the past that we're going to forever be healing. And, but how do we stop duplicating those wounds so that we're re-wounding ourselves over and over again, which is what a lot of what happens in relationship. Oh, I married my mother, married my father. And the secret to it really, I think, is to take a stand for a future that's unlike anything you've ever known before. Wow. I am a stand for happy, healthy love. I am committed to having that. I have no idea how to create that. And it would be a different version of myself than who I know myself to be. But the moment you have a future that you can commit to and intend, what happens is you suddenly start to relate to your quote unquote relational issues, not as wounds that you're forever trying to heal, but as missing development. Well, the truth is, I don't know how to have the boundaries I would need to, or how to self-regulate in a way that would make it possible for me to have good cohesive relationships. So there's literally missing development, which is why I think we're repeating patterns. I don't think we're repeating patterns to heal. I've never repeated a pattern and felt healed by the experience. I felt rewounded.
Yes. Wow.
Right. So that's the value of having a future.
That is amazing. And I've never quite heard it that way, that healing is different than transformation. And I do struggle with this, especially at this time in my life. And, like whatever it is we focus on, we're going to be drawn toward. That's brain science. That's what our brain does. And so like I kind of question, what are we doing as mental health therapists to be focusing on the diagnosis and to stay in perpetual quote unquote healing, like you said? But transformation is learning, growing, building one's character is kind of how I'm hearing what you're saying. Like
I love that you included character, skills, capacities, character. Yes. I mean, trust is, look, I always tell people, because a lot of spiritual people come to me, love is unconditional, but relationships are not, because relationships depend upon a conditional phenomenon called trust. And you have to have good character to build trust.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So yeah, character is a big part of it.
I love how you use the term husband. Explain that, because I think the terms really matter, don't they? Katherine, I don't even like to say my ex. I don't like that term. I've been saying,
yeah, what is it? It's like a violent word, right?
It is.
Excommunicate, axe, I'm going to chop his head off. It's like, there's a hostility in the word. So I like, softer landing. Even the word divorce is, if you look up, the root word is about separation, division. No, you're no longer together. So I think we just want to learn how to do things more consciously. We certainly, a lot of us grew up very damaged by the divorce of our parents. I mean, that's my story. And you can be sitting in therapy for decades trying to sort through some of that hornet's nest of what that created. So let's not do that to our children, and let's find a new way. So, I'm a big fan of Buckminster Fuller, who, really just said, look, if you want to reform something, it's best to just create an alternative. So I like alternatives. So conscious uncoupling, was been, my outlaws, my mother outlaw is another one we say with tongue in cheek, good humor.
It is.
Outlaw.
I don't know if you've heard the term, but I'm adopting it, that a marriage came to a natural completion. Like if you
that's beautiful.
Like I love that. I'm going to start using that word now instead of the D word, divorce. But I think the terms we use really do matter.
Somebody I couldn't figure out the word for ex-wife, but somebody just last week used with me was wife, my was wife.
Oh,
which I like. I like the was wife.
Yeah, like was.
I'll go for that.
Was.
Yeah, husband and was wife.
Oh yes, because and
by the way, I don't know when this is airing, but Constance Ahrens, who wrote the book The Good Divorce, really started the conscious divorce movement. She was really so progressive in her thinking. She had been divorced twice, another therapist who was divorced twice. And she created the Good Divorce, and she died this week. That's why I'm bringing her up, because I've just been thinking a lot about her and appreciating her so much.
I appreciate you telling me that. Yeah, and definitely get her book, because I'm definitely going to get that. So,
well, she has this idea of binuclear families, which is in conscious uncoupling, we call it a happily even after family.
I love that. Love that. Happily
expanded family, happily even after, and an expanded family where, my husband and I are both repartnered. And so we sometimes have a family meeting with our daughter. His new partner doesn't necessarily attend, but my partner does. And sometimes we all just exchange Christmas gifts, and it's just a nice cohesive feeling. Many years we did holidays together. My daughter's in college now, and we both moved, so that's no longer viable. But there's just a good feeling, almost like those folks are my cousins, so that my daughter doesn't have to leave one family to join another family.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. I want to give our listeners just a recap, so to speak, of what those 5 steps are, the conscious uncoupling. I did have a couple of questions, and I really want to honor your time.
Okay.
But one question is it possible to consciously uncouple things that are going on in an intact marriage that need uncoupling, like, I don't know, like toxic patterns and that kind of thing.
Oh, I love it when people do conscious uncoupling before they get divorced, because so much of, I've had so many people say to me, oh my gosh, I wish I had known this process before I divorced. I'd still be married, because I would have made some really significant changes that made the marriage viable. And there is, a percentage, I don't know what the actual percentage is, I have to do a more detailed study, but there are a lot of people do recouple because of the program, because essentially the program is teaching certain skills that if you had those skills in the relationship, you would manage the breakdowns very, very differently in your relationship, and in a way that could actually deepen intimacy between you and deepen the bond as opposed to do harm to the bond. So what I want to say, you picked up on something that I really loved that you said. It's not just another word for divorce. It is the recognition that where we are collectively in our development is that we're not really caught up to common culture. And so we still have these very primitive reactions to separation, to someone leaving or to leaving, that feel very life and death, and that engage our somatic selves in kind of a hormonal overload, and our brains and our bodies go on high alert and they go to war. And it's like life and death is at stake. And if you imagine people, if you lived 1,000 years ago in a tribe, it probably was life and death for you to leave that tribe. You probably would die. You would not last long without the tribe. And our bodies and brains still do that. So everything inside of us is hardwired to stay connected. And when people go from a positive bond to a negative bond, which is that soulmate to soul hate now, it's the trick of nature to keep us bonded, because hate is just as engaged as love.
Yeah, that's
in our own
that
psyche.
traumatic bonding. That's what kind of comes to me. That wow, that's
So
pretty profound.
conscious uncoupling is then engaging the inner development. The first 3 steps are all internal. It's the inner development that would allow us to do this in a way that kind of matches our spiritual principles and our ethics of how we would want to, or the commitment that we have to our kids to not mess up our kids. Right? So all of this, but we just haven't built the capacity for it. So I just wanted to set that up as you're going to go through the steps. So whatever questions you have.
Yeah, all kinds of things are coming up for me, actually, because I know that you got a daughter, and a daughter was involved in all of this. I'm kind of curious how your conscious uncoupling for you personally has affected your, the raising of your daughter, and give us some, because that's why people stay in even toxic marriages, because they think that they're doing it for the kids. But
there's studies that show, and see, Constance Ahrens actually writes about these. 20 years ago, she was writing about this. I think it was longer, 30, 40 years ago. I'd have to look and see when her book came out, but I think it was the late 80s. Anyway, there's studies that have been done that really show, we associate truancy, promiscuity, drug use, all that stuff with divorce, with broken families. But if you really look at the research, what those things are a reflection of are a war between 2 parents, whether or not they're married. So if you can manage to transition your family in a very cohesive way, where there is no break in belonging, there is no covertly pulling on your child to choose sides, or there is no feeling that they're living with now to go to one family, they're losing another, so they're constantly in a state of grief, and they're disoriented about home. And basically, if you tear a family apart, you basically leave a child homeless, So you can do that in an intact, legally married family. And this is also my issue with bird nesting, which is the practice of the parents, that the parents rotate which parent is there that week, and the children stay in one physical home, right? Which is a great idea. But if if the parents are at war, that home is not a home, it's just a house. And I think the issue is home. And home, as we know as therapists, is our relational field. That's our home. That's our true home. Right? So we're looking at, how do you not deconstruct home for your children? Well, this is a whole different skill set than anything we've ever seen modeled. So now with those first 3 steps are really that. Steps 4 and 5, now we're on the court with, how do you deal with this other person? How do you transition the relationship from one form to another in a way that makes sense, not just to you, but to the whole community? Because relationships don't just belong to 2 people, they belong to a community of people.
That's so true. So just to kind of ground our listeners in what these steps are, step 1, that is creating an inner sanctuary of safety.
Well, it's find emotional freedom.
Yeah. Okay.
And the inner sanctuary is part of that. Very important part of that.
And so many people don't do that. They get so busy, they get up and they just they're just going through their day busy and not even paying attention to that inner place. And
well, I think there's such a collapse with such big overwhelming feeling. Either that, or they just can't even get out of bed, right? Or they can't function at all. So, and people are running around, and the best way to get over someone is to get under someone else, and just trying to figure out how to manage these really difficult emotions. So the inner sanctuary of safety is about learning to hold and contain whatever is moving through you from a deeper center, that part of you that knows that no matter what, you're okay. No matter what your experience is right now, that you really are okay. And a really key part of that is to ask yourself, with all of the difficult, even negative, nasty emotions you're walking through, depression, sorrow, rage, all these things that you're feeling that are kind of short-circuiting you because they're bigger than you are. How do you actually take those negative emotions and turn them into a force for positive change? And one of the key questions you can ask yourself is, what is waking up inside of this feeling of rage, this feeling of overwhelming sorrow? And so an example of that might be, well, inside of rage, it's like the right to be treated with respect is waking up in me.
Yes.
Those
emotions, as intense as they are, and there's a reason for them. In my book, I talk about them being temporary messengers to our souls. And what do? We try to push it down, and that just makes them more stuck. They need to be honored and listened to. So it is so true. They need to flow. That's emotions in motion. So I think that's so true.
And one of the keys to being able to do that is to learn how to hold what you're experiencing without just collapsing into overly identifying with that experience, becoming the sadness. It's not just about feeling those feelings. It's about learning how to, it's the affect labeling that there were studies done at UCLA that really showed that when you can put a name to your feeling, it contains the feeling. So it's like, I teach people a practice that really came from Stephen Gilligan's self-relations therapy. I'm a big fan of Stephen Gilligan. He'd be another person to have on your show. He's so amazing. But he has this simple practice of just turning towards the self and the body and say, honey, what are you feeling right now? And naming that feeling and mirroring it back. Right. And just doing that until you're kind of clear. And then you can say, how old are you? To that younger part of you. What are you making this mean about you?
And that's why you have therapists that are trained to help people with this, because for them to read a book and just do this on their own, most people can't, right?
I do.
And
There's a whole coach training, and it's 6 months. We go very deep into all of this. Yeah, thank you.
And that's so, so valuable for sure. So the second one is to reclaim your power and your life. I know as a woman, so many give up their power and they don't. This is like that's powerful. Number 2 is powerful, to reclaim your power in your life. And I don't know, we probably don't have time to go through every one of them, but you're just going to have to get the book, Unconscious Coupling.
Well, the golden nugget on that is, if when you're really traumatized, you will ruminate.
Mm-hmm.
And generally the rumination, because you're trying to put the pieces together, your psyche is overwhelmed. That's what rumination is. But when we're telling and retelling the story, every little detail, we're generally doing it from a place of victimization. Why? Because somebody else probably behaved very badly. So we are kind of victimized. So it's not a denial of that. But what's going to set you free is to say, well, even if it was 97% the other person's fault, what's my 3%?
Yeah.
And it's that self-responsibility to see your 3%. And one of them is, this is the consequence of giving my power away to somebody. What motivated me to do that? And that kind of leads right into step 3, which is now we're looking at break the pattern, heal your heart. And what are the underlying beliefs that we've been carrying forward since childhood about important relationships? Where do we go? And I call that your source fracture story, the original break in your heart. And it's right up. And it's right up in the meaning that you're making in that breakup. I'll always be alone. See, no one will ever love me, or I'm not good enough, or whatever the emotional center is of the meaning that you're making. And we get to work with it right now. And one of the first things I tell people to do is say, honey, how old are you? And you see, it's a younger part of you. It's not the totality of you. And as an adult who knows how to be a great friend, maybe as a great parent, a very competent professional, you bring those resources and you say, sweetheart, let me tell you what's really true about this idea that you're not good enough. And you have to learn how to mentor yourself and wake yourself up from that trance and start to look at how would you show up differently if you were really centered there. So I take you through a real step-by-step process. So that's the first 3 steps, Judy, is those internal development. You can see that it could change relationships when people are in it. And they could start showing up differently.
Yeah, this sounds like it's a progressive work. I mean, you don't just do these steps once, right? I mean, or do you? Like, you can do this, or do you recommend this being like?
Well, if breakups were particularly if breakups are like, now you're in a court system and now you're adjusting to holidays and now that person's dating and they introduced your kids to their girlfriend. I mean, there's stuff. It's always it's a process. So yes, these are practices that you can revert back to. This is a way to work with it. That's kind of a North Star. I tell people nobody does conscious uncoupling perfectly. It's kind of like the bumpers at the bowling alley. The bumpers, you put them up when the kids go to bowl so that the ball doesn't go in the gutter. That's conscious uncoupling. You just pick up the book. I'm having a hard time with this. And you got the little bumper. Okay, of course, correct there. Okay, and then steps 4 and 5. 4 is my favorite, actually.
I love what it is. It's becoming a love alchemist. Tell us about that.
Well, it's really about, now you're going to begin to build repair into the relationship. There's likely some real damage done. And how do we clear the field so that we're not walking around with the residue of resentment or guilt, where we really have a clear field with the other person? So I offer a way to do that. And I also look at realigning what the intention is about the relationship. So in step 1, we set a personal intention. I'm going to, outgrow who I've known myself to be, so that from now on, my relationships are going to be healthy and respectful towards me, mutual. I'm only going to be intimate with people who have the capacity to love me. I'm not going to think I can make it up for both of us or whatever we've been doing. And
yeah, we have to bust through those illusions, haven't we? Like, it's kind of like we're living in this Cinderella. I mean, we've been deeply ingrained with that as women, I think, hearing all these fairy stories, right? And having Prince Charming.
And then step 4 is about really like, it might be that we're great co-parents. Some people don't want to be connected to their former partner. Conscious uncoupling doesn't take a big stand for friendship. I think friendship is earned. And sometimes if someone has revealed a poor character, it's not smart to stay connected. So it might be that how you hold that person moving forward is that was your dark guru, your wonderful teacher that you learned so much from, and you bless them and thank them and send them on your way, but you're not walking around with all of this unresolved resentment. My favorite part, though, of step 4 is the generosity piece, where I invite people to really step into being generous as a way to begin to generate something new and initiate a new era in the relationship that's built on mutuality and respect and friendliness. You know, you might never be best of friends, but you want to make sure that, particularly if this is someone you're co-raising children with, that there's a clear field and a friendly feeling between you. So there's some repair work that needs to be done. And so I advocate for generous gestures of repair.
Wow. Oh, Katherine, this is amazing. So part of me thinks that I don't know if people automatically think, okay, I'm going to do this conscious uncoupling and my spouse or ex-spouse is going to do it too. Does that ever happen?
Yeah, everybody thinks that, and it doesn't normally happen. 95% of people do it alone. Yeah.
95% do it alone. Okay, well, that makes sense, because that was my next question, is like, if they're getting a divorce, you hadn't been able to do anything agreeable or the same anyway, like how in the world could you expect
and sometimes you do. I mean, sometimes you do, but even when people do it together, they're doing it separately. And I tell people, don't have the fantasy that you're going to do it. You're going to be on the same page with it. Somebody wants to stay on step 1 for a month. And somebody's already on to step 4 by week 2, like that. You know, people have their own pacing. So this is an unusual program about, you know, created by a marriage family therapist about how to separate. You're not, you're creating separateness and spaciousness in your relationship and coming home to yourself.
People will go through this and then they maybe do try to recouple back on their own. I'm wondering what the percentage of that would be, where people are doing that. Or just going through conscious uncoupling, they like think, oh, I'm so glad I'm uncoupled. I never want to get coupled again with this person in that way, right? I don't know if it kind of, so tell me more about that.
I think some people go a little back and forth. Some people do actually recouple, and certainly, you know, anyone doing conscious uncoupling, if they're going back, they're bringing that into the relationship. What are they bringing? They're bringing a greater capacity to self-regulate, a greater capacity to be responsible for their own choices and actions, and to see that more clearly and to take responsibility for that, what that creates for the other person. They understand about how to make an amends to the other person when they have wronged them. A lot of us think that, you know, if we've made a mistake and we've hurt someone's feelings, we think that if we explain the psychology of why we did what we did, that it should clear the air, but it doesn't.
It does the opposite, actually.
It does the opposite. It's like, oh, I see, this person's really damaged and they're always going to wound me this way. That's how that goes, right?
Yeah.
So you really have to learn the art of mirroring the damage that your unconscious behavior did, and then learn how to make an amends for that. So we talk about that in step 4. That's part of clearing the air between you. And you also learn how you show up inside of your original source frac story when you get quote unquote triggered, and start to show up inside of that consciousness in ways that literally pull on the other person and set them up to duplicate your story. And when you start to see that clearly, you go, oh my gosh. And so the ability to kind of wake yourself up to a deeper truth and to start to show up in ways that are, you know, healthier and more generative of the relationship you want to be having.
I tell
You know,
you
all
what,
these things can happen in conscious uncoupling.
if people don't do their own conscious uncoupling here, it's really, really very, very likely you're going to marry maybe a different person, but they're going to have the same relationship dance is going to show up. It's like, and that's why I like to look at my former husbands as these were men that I needed in my life in order to awaken me to this level and to get me grounded in my purpose in life. And so we need to do our own work, because otherwise we're going to end up like Groundhog Day, right?
Yeah, well, I think we're very unconscious still collectively as to this, how am I the source of my own experience? Because, for example, it's very covert. If I go to a place, I default to a place, my trigger place is that I'm all alone here.
Mm-hmm.
I will have ways of relating that generate that. So, for example, you know, I'm all alone. Everyone always leaves me. I can't ever get my needs met. That's the consciousness I'm walking in. I've collapsed into that self rather than saying, how old are you, sweetheart? What's really true is you have the power to generate connection. That's not where I'm going. I'm just kind of collapsing into the 4-year-old perspective, and I'm acting from there. So I'm going to do things like, you know, be very self-sufficient, not ask for help, get my safety from kind of being the one who's always giving without expecting much in return. So I'm going to get into relationships with people who maybe don't have a lot to give. Maybe I give myself away. I self-abandon because it's in my relationship with myself where I leave myself alone. I self-abandon a lot to try and prevent people from leaving me. So there's like a whole system of how I'm relating to myself, to others, to life. And it just, and I mistake it for my personality or my issues. But it's actually me generating from that core consciousness. And so I've really got to start to see how I am the source of of the dynamics in my relationship, and not just kind of be victimized by some vague, oh, I married my narcissistic father again. I have no access to change. And as a matter of fact, I think it's slippery because, you know, if you connect the dots between what happened in your past and what's happening in your present without seeing this piece of how am I perpetuating that in the present, how am I generating that, then what happens is we get stuck because we're kind of victimized by what my father did 40 years ago. Even if he's like owned it now and made amends, or even if he passed away 20 years ago, I'm still, it's the self that formed in response to that dynamic.
Yeah.
And by the way, you mentioned before the metaphysical principle of what we put our attention to grows. If you keep going backwards and keep unpacking that story and bring our clients into that over identification with the self that got formed in that story without identifying it as much and challenging that self, what we're doing is actually we're solidifying the self that formed there. So I don't like staying too long in the past. I like going in the past just enough to really, well, first of all, you know, you have to do the trauma work of reclaiming your body. You have to see it clearly where you split off with yourself. Very important work. But then what we're looking at is, well, who, you know, what did you make it mean about you? What's the self you crafted in response to that incident or ongoing experience? And how do you wake yourself up from that trance?
And to have a vision, because it's like our brains, we can get so, like, it's so easy to look back and have those as points, but to realize, okay, I was on this journey, but that in the past doesn't define me. It's the pathway I've gotten to where I am right now. Is that kind of what you mean? Like being able to, okay, let's do whatever we need to do there, but let's not stay there. Let's move forward.
Well, I like the mentoring relationship. I tell people you're never going to get rid of that part of you, and you'll probably always get triggered by certain things. But what you do develop is the ability to just stop, take a deep breath and say, what am I assuming is true right now? Where am I centered? Because wherever we're centered at the level of identity is where we will respond from, and it's where how we'll generate our relationships, how we'll generate our life, right? So relationships are dynamic. They're always shifting and changing. So it's really helping all of us to develop the capacity to stand in what's really true in a way we can feel in our bodies and relate to that younger self and go back and mentor that self to more true meaning. So it's a holding. I have the image of, the workers out in the field, mothers out in the field, and they strap their babies onto their bodies so that they're going about their day, but they're kind of holding that baby. And another image I have is, get the child out of the driver's seat, put her in the back seat, put her in a loving car seat where she's safe. You can talk to her, but the grown-up is driving the car, the relationships.
By the time you're a grandmother, I've got 5 grandkids, Katherine, and that's a great analogy too. Like, okay, can you buckle them up? I'm the one that is driving the vehicle here. But everything you're teaching here in your 5 steps, again, I feel so like a soul sister with you, because I do use this acronym in my book about breathing fresh air, and that does slow down the nervous system. But the A, the acronym of the A, awareness, and the I, intentionality, and then the R is the risk of growth. But to ask yourself, is what I'm believing, is this really true? I mean, we need to be doing that throughout our lives, because our brains are going to think this is gospel truth, because of all the neural pathways that have been developed early on and all of that stuff. I love the work you're doing, Katherine. I just really appreciate.
Well, your work sounds amazing too, and I look forward to learning more about you. You're doing such great things.
Well, thank you so much. And first of all, is there one piece of advice that you would give couples or an individual that's listening today?
Who is getting separated, maybe general advice?
Just general advice. Maybe so I'm thinking a lot of folks that are listening to this, entrepreneurial couples, in transition, and
just start with the future that you're committed to creating. Always start with the future, and let that inform the choices you're making and the actions that you're taking, finding your way to that future. I mean, that's not a new thought. Stephen Covey talked about that starting at the end, and a lot of great teachers. I know John Gottman in A Fight. What do you want? How do you want this to end?
Yes.
Who do you want at your funeral, right?
Yeah.
But I think that we're a little bit, we've all gotten very strong with looking backwards to find out why we are the people that we are. And I think we're a little too weak when it looks, when we're really looking at the future, and not just what do we want to have, but who do we want to be? And then using that as our North Star and organizing ourselves to become who we would need to be in order to manifest that particular future.
Beautiful, beautiful. And how can our listeners learn more about you and get in touch with you?
Oh, thank you. I have so much happening all the time, which is so great. We have a very active community, and I try to do a lot of community teaching calls and free workshops for people. And then, of course, we generally will have courses going on. So people just go to Katherine Woodward Thomas. I have something called the Love Out Loud, and I send out free teachings every week. And that's a good way to start with me, because you get on the list to be invited to free classes and stuff. And so I try to not overwhelm people. So it's just one 300-word document that I send out with these golden nuggets of how to make our relationships better. But that's a good way to start with me.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Katherine. I really appreciate your time, your expertise, just the difference that you're making in the world. And again, thank you for making a difference in my life. It's been an honor to have you.
Thank you, Judy. Thanks for having me. God bless you.
You're welcome. Bye-bye. Talking with Katherine felt so validating. As I reflected on our conversation, here's a few things I pondered. Number one, Since we're so good at looking back at the past, the retelling of our story can actually keep us stuck. Number 2, when experiencing strong emotions, we can ask ourselves, what is it that's waking up? We can become more aware and break patterns that we're familiar with. And number 3, I loved her advice at the end. Start with the future. Who do you want to be? What stood out to you? Go to judycounselor.com and take the relationship stress quiz. I would love to support you. And in our next episode, it's entitled The Whiny Palooza Traditional Marriage. I get to interview Seth and Rebecca Green. This entrepreneurial couple will share their marital journey in the midst of raising children at home. You don't want to miss it. Until then, feel free to share, subscribe, rate, and comment in the streaming platform of your choice. And share your takeaways by going to betterrelationshipsbetterlife.com. See you next time.